Have you heard that joke where the punchline is something like, a pig that good? You don't eat all at once. Well, following in that vein, Little Bites is a horror with a new twist on the vampire genre. Please excuse this pun, but should you sink your teeth into it? In a desperate attempt to protect her 10-year-old daughter, a young widow allows a nightmarish monster to slowly eat her alive. This is a patient and brooding story that uses isolation and some fear to create unease and a slow building dread. Now, the story follows the main character of Mindy, who's played by Chrissy Fox, who's harboring a vampire in her house who feeds on her incessantly. Fox creates Mindy to be a somewhat sympathetic character, but also one who is cagey and very suspicious and wary of outsiders. Pretty much meaning anybody who's not her daughter. We learn through phone calls with her mom that Mindy has sent her daughter to stay with grandma for a bit while Mindy sorts things out. And from the looks of her, she's got a bunch to deal with. The makeup that the production uses, it is wonderful, making Mindy slowly become paler and yellow, where you can just see the toll that the feeding is taking on her as this creature just drains her of her being. And the makeup on the creature design, it's gross too, but not overdone or extravagant. The monster is creatively realized, taking the familiarity of the human form and subtly augmenting it to be relatably grotesque. A couple of times the vampire resembled the orc from The Two Towers, the one that tries to eat Merry and Pip. You know, the one who looks like Alice Cooper. Well, if you didn't see it before, you are welcome because you'll not be able to unsee Alice Orc anymore. All right, there's also this moment where Mindy disrobes, and the horrors that her body has endured, they are brutal. The skin changes that she experiences, they're also convincing, showing this deterioration and physical exertion that she undergoes. We see the violence of the bites. None are massive in size, but they're numerous, showing that the attacks, while small, are almost all-consuming. Now, the ASMR effect as Mindy is being bitten, it is extremely visceral and quite gross. We hear the slurps and the chomps, just as teeth break through flesh to free the fluids and the inner protein. The mental picture that the sounds create, they are way more harrowing than if we'd been shown all of the action in great detail. Now, we are treated to some, but it's not nearly as gory as it could be. And I love that this is a pivotal element in establishing the repulsing horror. It works, especially with how steadily and confidently the story slowly reveals its design. Now, the production also balances the violence and the gore with what it creates with just theater of the mind. Just as I had said, we don't always see all of the carnage, but we certainly hear it, and thanks to seeing some goopy blood dripping and savage flesh tearing, our minds can then build out all of the other scenarios that were not shown. But when we do see that brutality, it's nasty. And kudos to the effects team for creating such awesome practical effects. Now, I appreciate the extreme discomfort Mindy has when interacting with just about everybody. She comes across as stiff, but it's perfect because the character is consistently conflicted with balancing what's right with her own struggles. The determination in both eyes and mannerisms begins to become freaky intense. And there's this urgency with her actions. At times, a decisiveness that comes through necessity rather than desire. The cruelty of the vampire and how it qualifies its requirements for a meal, it's disturbing to say the least. I prefer my meals that have something to lose. This illustrates the control that it exerts and the overall darkness of the story. The suffering, it invades the entire story, creating this oppressive feeling that maintains a growing dread all throughout the narrative. Now, I really wanted to know more about the monster. It's freaky to see and then to watch it feed, but there's also this huge backstory that I was just dying to learn about. Luckily, thanks to some very clever storytelling, we get all of the backstory that we need to make the creature as dreadful and damaging as it can be. And I love that we get two scream queens in this too. Barbara Crampton and Heather Langenkamp both make appearances, with Langenkamp getting to deliver a very poignant scene with Chrissy Fox. Now, the face-to-face interaction that Mindy has with her mom, I thought these were kind of strange, but also not very convincing. The shift in emotions that we watch, they're rushed, forced, unnatural. Unfortunately, too, the scene is then cringy and probably one of the weakest in the movie, even though that the content is pivotal to the entire storyline. And a portion of this movie reminded me of The Babadook. Not necessarily in that soul-disturbing creepiness of that amazing film, but there's an underlying sweetness and unexpected strength to the message of the story. The narrative works to wrap us up into the events, watching this patient descent of Mindy into despair, even submission, and then to present an emotional term that provides a glimmer of hope within all of that darkness. Now, one nitpick I have for this is the pace, and it's not really that huge of an issue. The story development, it is patient but deliberate. I mean, it feels like some moments won't ever get to their payoff. And then, when some do, they do feel a little lackluster. But when taken as a whole, these slower and drawn-out scenes, they build on the characters, especially Mindy. So that even though taken individually, the sequences might come across as too long, when they're all combined, they create the needed backing for rationales, motivations, and actions. Yeah, I know, okay, so it's not that much of a nitpick. But if you do feel that the story is progressing a bit slowly, know that it's by design to create a deeper connection and understanding with our main character. Now, another small issue I have within the story involves where a certain character goes. This is going to be vague, so as not to give anything away, but there's a moment when a character just no longer in the story. I got questions on what transpired. Now, does it ruin the storytelling? No, not at all. But it was a bit of a head-scratcher, especially once all is said and done. Now, after gnawing on this for a bit and then dissecting the underlying theme and message, this went from being a decent movie to a freaking awesome one that contains concepts that are way deeper than how it first appears. I mean, if you come away from this film thinking it's solely a vampire flick, you've shorted yourself on what the story was presenting. The relationships are central to the plot, and they hold a ton of meaning, giving us insight into what's actually occurring. And without spoiling it, I'm going to give you a hint. Focus on the conversations that Mindy has with her mom, and then the chat that she has with Langenkamp. The pieces should begin to fall into place, looking especially at Mindy's relationships. Now, I think I might put a brief explanation at the very end of this, but there is going to be plenty of warnings so that you could avoid the spoilers if you just don't want to hear them yet. So overall, Little Bites is a surprisingly deep horror with relevant messaging and terrifically imagined violence, all wrapped up in an allegory of an all-consuming vampire. Chrissy Fox delivers a stellar performance, showcasing vulnerability and resignation while also displaying life-altering strength. While on its surface, this is a decent vampire horror, but what's contained inside is brilliantly unique with indelible messaging and immense heart. Don't approach this as a traditional horror, but instead expect a purposeful and resonant tale. There's no sex or nudity, some profanity, and then some brutal violence. I give Little Bites 5 out of 5 couches. I mean, if it weren't for the spectacular theme that's addressed, this just would have been okay. But as it stands, knock over the elderly and little kids to go and see this. All right, so have you seen any movies that surprised you with the messaging that they contained? You know, a movie that appeared to be one thing, but then was so much more impactful at its core. Now, for me, Arrival is one of those. Let me know yours, though, in the comments below. If you enjoyed this review, please give it a like. Also, don't forget to share and subscribe. I'm Chris. This is Movies and Munchies. Thanks for couching with me. All right, so here is a brief explanation of the vague items that I was speaking of earlier. Now, obviously, this is going to be full of spoilers, so now is your chance to bail if you don't want to hear them. All right, the vampire that we see is the personification of Mindy's mom. The little bites that she delivers are all those barbs, jabs, and criticisms that are launched. And we hear so many of them over the phone, and then even when the mom drops off the daughter. Instead of being supportive, there's a barrage of compliments within this abrupt, I love you, tacked on at the end. I mean, this is the destructive force in Mindy's life. It eats away at her and slowly is destroying her, draining all that she is. And because a vampire wants the daughter too, this refers to the continuation of the emotional abuse or degradation. When Mindy talks with Heather Langenkamp at the park, Langenkamp talks about the 3 stages of mothers and daughters, with that final stage being standing beside. She also talks about how 10 years old is about when it starts, pointing directly to the approximate starting point when contention can arise between a mother and daughter, as the younger just begins to enter puberty and experiences natural emotional changes. I mean, the two can butt heads and have their conflicts within their personalities. But it's also pointed out that this isn't a lasting issue. I mean, it's just a stage, part of growing up and maturing. And when you reach the final stage, there's a wonderful relationship to experience. But in order to get there, the mom also has to endure the little bites of her past and then not pass those along to the daughter. And we see that illustrated on Langenkamp's arms. She has the scars of the bites she encountered from her relationship with her mom. And what I love about this is that as things begin to click for Mindy, that's when she gains the confidence to stand up to the monster. She shows strength by not putting her daughter in the same situation. Instead, Mindy informs that monsters do exist, and then by showing her own bites and scars, allows the daughter to come alongside. Now, Mindy isn't biting the daughter or even allowing the monster to either, but together, they then devour the monster and kill the cycle. The end is beautiful as we see Mindy years later sitting on her couch, and then she goes to the door and greets her daughter, who's several years older. Now, the daughter isn't there unwillingly, but shows joy to see her mom, providing the resolution for us that Mindy did indeed end the cycle. Now, the one thing I still am a little unclear on is what happened to Barbara Crampton's character. I mean, she obviously came to the house, but then she just disappeared. And we know the monster devoured her, but did Mindy, or even the mom, do something terrible to Crampton in order just to keep the daughter safe? I'm going to have to rewatch this one just to see if I can catch part of a clue for this. All right, so that's it. I would love to hear more thoughts. If you are going to talk about the spoilers, please give it some room so that people don't get it spoiled before they actually see it. Again, if you enjoyed this, please give it a like. Also, don't forget to share and subscribe. I'm Chris. This is Movies and Munchies. Thanks for couching with me.